Um, my name's Daniel Gowan. Dr. Hijazi and I are co-founders of D2 Counseling. We formed this company a couple of years ago, and one of the things that we have done to try to support the community is we reignited the Dallas Free Lecture Series. And this is held on the third Tuesday of each month, though we do skip December. But we are delighted tonight to have Rick Spletter, who's going to speak for us. But this is one of the things that we do at D2 Counseling to support the mental health community. We bring in a variety of different topics and speakers. And we at D2 are big believers in a lot of experiential therapies as well. We run a lot of groups. We're starting a new couples group in January. Actually, we're starting two couples groups, one that's going to focus on intimacy, and another one that's going to talk about parenting, coupleship through parenting. And with both of those, if you have an interest, shoot me an email or get in touch with us if you as a couple would like to participate in that. We've got various workshops, and then we've got some of the finest clinicians in town.
Well, I don't know
and
why.
we will continue to meet the needs of the community as we can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dina Hijazi to say hi.
Hi, you did such a great job, Daniel. I have nothing left to say except welcome everybody. And we're just so grateful that we can do this on this venue and keep ourselves safe. And who knows what next year will bring, but we're glad that we've been able to do this and really appreciate you all hanging in there with us and joining us on virtual.
All right, so I'm assuming everybody is a bit familiar with Zoom by now, because there are so many things that we're doing virtually. And so when it comes to noise in the background or things like that, if some of that starts happening, I may make mention of that and request people to put the speakers on mute. But otherwise, I just invite you to keep your speaker on and make comments as I invite you to do so, etc. So I first want to thank Daniel and Dina. It's a wonderful opportunity to share some of my thoughts on deep intimacy. And I've been through my share of slings and arrows of misfortune in that regard as time has gone on. And I feel very grateful that I've come a long way down that path. And I think there's always further that we can go. But at least for now, I've got a few ideas that I'd like to share, and hopefully they'll offer some enlightenment to people. I'm delighted to see some new faces. I'm delighted to see some old faces. Don't take that personally. I don't mean you're old. I mean, they're people that I've known for quite a number of years. So glad to see you all. And if you'll indulge me for just a minute, I love to tell a few jokes. And there are a few jokes that I have that I think might lend themselves to this topic. So the first one is, what's the difference between love and marriage? Love is blind, and marriage is an eye-opener. It's also one that I like. Love is blind, and marriage is an institution for the blind. Robin Williams is credited with this one. See, the problem is that God gave man a head and a penis, but only enough blood to supply one at a time. You know, thinking with the wrong head, you've heard that one before. And then there are a number of mechanical devices that are used for sexual arousal. For women, one of the main ones is a Mercedes-Benz 380 SL. I think those are funny. You can give me a chance on that if you'd like. So when I go to a presentation, I like to learn a little bit about who the speaker is. So I'm going to share with you just a little bit about who I am. First and foremost, I am deeply in love with my wife of 31 years. It really is remarkable. Just as time has gone on, it just gets better and better. We're now empty nesters, and after 3 kids who I adore, We have a daughter and a son-in-law who I adore. We've got just one of the most wonderful experiences as a family we could ever have. So to me, that's just one of the biggest joys in my life. And it's the number one topic in my mind, but we're not here to talk about my family. I've been a mind-body therapist in private practice for 40 years. And bioenergetics has been the primary modality that I've used as I work with clients. Prior to bioenergetics, I was in Gestalt and transactional analysis. You guys remember some of those older types of therapy. But it was primary talk therapy. And I found that if the therapist was touching on subjects that were hard for me, I'd find a way to bring up a different topic and just kind of scoot away from that topic. But when I found bioenergetics and doing body work, whatever began to surface was pretty real, and I couldn't really avoid it. There wasn't anything to avoid. So it was just a remarkable kind of significant shift in the way that I began to learn more about myself and uncover some of the deep wounds that I had inside. I'm also trained in emotional transformation therapy, the ETT model, which I think is a very effective model. I'm also someone who's taken a deep dive into alternative medicine. I was diagnosed with cancer in 2015, and also had some heart issues. I have a few stents in my heart, but I never had a heart attack, so no damage to the heart. I've done all alternative for my cancer, and I have no cancer in my system. So no radiation, no chemo. And it's something that I've really, my wife and I have both taken a deep, deep dive since then, just in what to eat, various kinds of health procedures and things that we do to stay healthy. So it's a great, we've uncovered a lot of wonderful things. So if anybody has any interest in that topic, give me a call. I'd love to talk about health. Okay, now I'd like to learn a few things about you. How about just a show of hands, or maybe take your mic off of mute, since I'm not seeing, let's see, maybe I can get everybody on the screen from where I'm looking here. See if this works. But I'd like to find out, and maybe on your screen you're not able to see everybody, but I'd like to get a sense about, nope, that's not working. I'd like to get a sense about just some idea as to who you are. How many of you are therapists? And again, you can take your mic off of mute and say "I," or just raise your hand. Let's see how many of you are therapists. Does anybody have the full screen with,
I am.
with the grid of everybody? I'm not sure how to do that on mine, so I'll have to just.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, so let me see if I can make this.
I am too.
I want to find out if
I think you have to take off the share in order to see the full screen.
That's right, Dan.
Okay. I wish I was more technically adept, but I'm not. All right. Can't get it all in there.
You can have everyone type it into the chat box, and then you'll see it on the right-hand side.
That would work too. Everybody know how to do that? Just type into the chat box. Okay. Well, still not able to get it, but I don't want to take a lot of time for this piece of it. So several of you are therapists. How many of you are in committed relationships? Just say "I" or raise your hand.
Aye.
Hi.
Hi. Hi.
Yep, me too.
Okay. Well, without a full screen, we're not going to be able to get quite the impact I was hoping to get, but that's okay. And then how many of you have been deeply wounded by a relationship that ended badly?
Aye.
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 I'm
Aye.
going to assume that that's true for everybody.
Yeah.
Surely we've all had a broken heart. So that to me is pretty significant. And oftentimes we end up changing the way that we approach relationships based on that wound and based on that hurt. So now I want to talk just a little bit about this bioenergetic stuff. Okay, so why is the body so important in psychotherapy? Well, there's a simple question. When you are feeling, let's say, sadness, where do you feel it? Any thoughts? Where do you feel it? Where do you feel sadness? Most
Chest.
people say in their heart or in their belly. So what about anger? Where do you feel anger?
In your back.
In your back? Back and arms oftentimes.
Neck.
In your neck, yep. So if you can talk about that using some talk therapy approaches, along with working with the physical body, you can move it through your system faster. And that seems to be consistently true in my experience as I've done this body work therapy stuff for all these years. The feeling needs to go through your system. There's no detour. Jack Daniels helps to avoid it for a time, but you can't avoid it. It comes back, right? So now I want to talk about what I have to offer tonight. First of all, I want to define intimacy. It's used in a lot of different contexts, right? Hey, honey, let's get intimate tonight. Or, wow, that was a really intimate discussion. Or, is this new person in your life an intimate partner or just a friend? So those are some common uses for the word intimate, but I'm going to offer a different definition. If I'm intimate with somebody, the idea of being into me see, intimacy into me see. I want you to see and be aware as much as possible all of me. I want you to be aware of all of my good points, all of my warts. I want you to see everything. And that takes a lot of courage. You need to have a pretty strong sense of self, because if we have a strong sense of self, then the relationship is icing on a very nice cake. So the cake is already baked. It's you, you're solid. You feel solid within yourself. And the relationship is icing on the cake. So hopefully if the relationship ends and we're left, abandoned, rejected, whatever it is, there's a way that we can say, I'm strong enough to get through this, and I will come out stronger on the other side. Another way to think about intimacy is belonging to or characterizing one's deepest nature. And so now I want to emphasize where I want you to think, how you want to think about the main takeaway for tonight. And this may sound strange, but I'll get into a few details to help flesh it out. But the main takeaway for tonight is that releasing tension in the pelvis and grounding are the keys to opening your heart. I'll say that again. Releasing tension in the pelvis and grounding are keys to opening your heart. Now, the concept of grounding, for those of you who are not familiar, basically, if you look at a person head to toe, there's X amount of energy in their body at any given time. In Western culture, we tend to pull our energy up. So we're getting anxious, we're getting frightened, we tighten the diaphragm, we pull that energy up. Grounding is trying to make sure that the excess energy in our body goes down to our feet and safely released out through our feet. Again, maybe a strange concept for people who are not familiar with it, but it's something that is pretty effective, I would say. So anything that we can do to release the tension and allow the energy to come down into our legs, we're going to be much more solid. We're not going to be pulled up and feeling like, oh, I'm so frightened. We can let down and be solid in our feet, solid in our whole body. And then when it comes to the idea of the pelvis, in a mind-body therapy paradigm, the pelvis is the seat of our empowerment. We can't feel empowered unless we've got a good flow of energy going through our pelvis. That's the concept. Shame and trauma are often locked in the pelvis. Simple example. We've all seen dogs before that when we approach them, they tuck their tail and they run away. So they're pulling their pelvis under, tucking their tail and running away. So we can easily assume that that dog has been beaten way too much. And so they're very frightened. And so they don't have the empowerment. They just need to run away and not stand their ground. Another example has to do with somebody named David Berselli. He's somebody who is a missionary. I think he probably still is, but he developed a whole series of exercises, and I won't bore you with the exercises, but he talks about being in the basement of a building in, I think it was Beirut at the time, many years ago. And so there's some shelling going on, and he and all these people are sitting on the floor, lined up around the wall. And every time a shell goes off, he sees people sitting down and they go like this. There's a movement of their pelvis like this every time a shell explodes. And from that, he started thinking, oh my gosh, there must be something about the pelvis and the way that trauma gets locked into the pelvis. So he developed a whole series of exercises, which are fantastic, by the way. And now I'm going to show you an image of the psoas muscle. And this is the main muscle that connects the upper body and the lower body. Get it here in just a minute. Well, there, I think it's coming. There we go. So the psoas muscle is something that it attaches there at the lower back area, comes across the pelvis, and then goes down and inserts right there underneath. You can see where it inserts there at the leg bone. Those are the only muscles that connect the upper body and the lower body. So why is that so important? Well, if there's a great amount of tension in that psoas muscle, then you're going to end up with contortions in various ways of your body. In fact, chiropractors know this very well, but very subtle shifts in the pelvis, whether it's a little bit forward, a little bit back, a little bit twisted, whatever it is, it can affect all parts of the body. So it can affect your shoulder, your neck, and on and on and on. So the psoas muscle is just one of those.
Hey, Rick, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt. I don't think
Sure.
you're sharing.
Uh-oh. Well, let's see what I can do about that.
We're still seeing you. We're
Okay.
not seeing your picture or your PowerPoint.
So if I come over here and I go to a bigger screen and I'll share screen. There we go. How's that?
There we see it.
Now
All right, thank you. So as you can see, the psoas muscle, as I was pointing out before, lower back comes across. It doesn't go through the pelvis, it goes across the pelvis. So I just offer this as a quick illustration to give you an idea that it's that muscle that is incredibly important in having a sense of empowerment. Because if that is frozen or locked or one side is pulled tight, the other one is loose, et cetera, it's going to dramatically impact the way we are in terms of the overall balance in our body. And there's a series of exercises we're not going to have time to get into tonight to be able to release the psoas and allow there to be much more of a sense of opening in that area. But the main concept I want to offer is that to whatever extent we can get the flow of energy moving through our pelvis, we're going to feel much greater sense of empowerment and the ability to be able to move forward with whatever challenging tasks we have to face. Okay. So, if I'm not feeling a strong sense of myself, I'm not going to be willing to risk being vulnerable with another person. We stop, excuse me, we stop the flow of energy in our pelvis all the time, but most of us are not aware of that. But when we have that strong flow of energy in our pelvis, we're connected to our core and we feel centered. And when we open the pelvis, we can drain off the excess energy that is looking for a place to go. The excess energy in our body it often goes to unnecessary chatter and worry. Energy is looking for places to go. And we always have excess energy in our body, the theory suggests. How many of you are familiar with these concepts? Just a voice comment or show of hands. All right. So again, since I don't have, I'm not able to see everybody screen together, I'll just have to accept that some people are aware of this and some people are not. All right, so now I'm going to share the screen again and go to just a couple of PowerPoints. So I want to share a few ideas that to me are necessary ingredients for intimacy, and then we can get into ways to be able to open up to the grounding and feel more of that empowerment, a sense of connection through our pelvis. I just want to go over these briefly, but the things that I'm going to get into in a few minutes are founded on the idea that these are already present in your relationship. Because if these are not present, chances are the kinds of things that I'm going to guide you through are going to be minimally helpful. But to the extent that you're already have these in place, chances are these approaches and techniques are going to be of some help. So good communication, of course, quality time together, mutual respect, the ability to apologize, commitment to the relationship, willing to share your feelings and your fears, and willingness to work on your resentments toward your partner and others. The reason I include and others is that whenever we feel some resentment, and maybe we're talking about it from time to time, somebody out there at work or some neighbor or whatever, if we're continually caught up in a sense of resentment, the way that I think of it is it hardens our heart. Resentment hardens our heart. And so even if it's toward a neighbor and we're deeply in love with our partner, there's still a way that our heart is going to be hardened some by that experience that we continually run through our head and continually fight in our bodies as we think about that resentment. So to whatever extent we're carrying resentment toward anybody, especially our partner, I think it's very wise to work through that resentment. Al Lowen is the founder of bioenergetics, and I want to suggest, and maybe this is an idea that most people are already familiar with, but in the final analysis, to surrender in love is not to surrender to another person, but to oneself, one's heart and one's desire for love. Doing so, however, includes all one's feelings. When the ego relinquishes its hegemony, it gives up control over the body and its feelings. It must accept the fear of abandonment, the pain of loss, the anger of betrayal. It must also accept the self as helpless in all the major events of life: birth, love, sickness, death. So it's surrendering to ourself. And again, that may be a concept that a lot of you are already familiar with, but to me, it's very important and pretty pivotal in this whole concept and idea. Because if I'm surrendering to the despair inside of myself or whatever the feeling is, and allowing that to happen and be vulnerable in those moments, I'm surrendering to myself and allowing myself to become a more fulfilled individual. And then we have some concepts that underlie our difficulty in opening our hearts. Being vulnerable and surrendering to our fear is unpleasant and can make us feel defenseless. That's tough. Being vulnerable. Admitting that I need you puts us in a seeming one-down position. If our hearts are open, our emotions are more in the foreground, making life a bit more like a roller coaster ride. How many of you like roller coasters? Emotionally, maybe not so much, right? But if I'm at the fair and I'm going on the roller coaster, different story. And then we can't open our hearts unless we feel safe. And safety is an inside job. So I'd like to pause for a moment and see if there are comments, questions about any of these concepts, because these are some of the foundational pieces that I've built my presentation on. And maybe you have some agreement, maybe disagreement, or just questions about it. So let me pause for a minute and see if there are any thoughts about this. Okay, we'll keep going. So how many of you are familiar with attachment theory? I would imagine all of the therapists in the meeting are. And what does that theory suggest? It suggests that we're really hungry for connection, really eager to connect. There's a longing. One of the other concepts that I really like is what Winnicott said. Winnicott said, there is no such thing as a baby. When I first heard that, it just made my head spin. What do you mean there's no such thing as a baby? Well, the idea is that it's an energetic exchange between the baby and the mother. That's who the baby is. It's that connecting, and it's the energy between the two that's the real magic. It's not that there's an individual with 10 fingers and 10 toes, etc. It's the energetic exchange between the baby and the mother. That's what Winnicott has suggested, which to me makes total sense. Some people even suggest that there's no such thing as self-awareness, but that's an oxymoron because it has to do with how did we develop that sense of self? It was through the reflection of a caregiver. Anyway, that's for a different topic or a different talk, and we're not going to get into the details of that. But for now, let's just consider that it's the energy between two people that is sacred and magical state. And I'm even going to suggest that there's like a magnetic pull. So I'm going to suggest you just take a few moments for a little self-awareness and think about someone in your life with whom you've had a very challenged relationship. I'm even going to suggest you stand as you do this because you can get more connected to your body awareness if you're willing to just stand and just do this brief experiential exercise with me. So think about somebody who you've had a very challenged relationship with. Maybe it's somebody who betrayed you, somebody who's hateful toward you, maybe someone who's treated you unfairly. Imagine for a moment that this person is standing in front of you. What do you notice in your body? Yeah. Chances are you feel some of your muscles contract and you pull your energy backwards. Some of you are going to notice that your diaphragm gets tight. Your head and neck are pulled back and braced. You're in a protective mode. The animal instinct is to feel fear and prepare to protect or fight or flight or freeze. Your neocortex is on pause because the brainstem says, wait a minute, we need all this focus right here because it's time for protection. Now, take a few deep breaths and shake your body just like geese would do after they battle each other. Just shake your body a little bit. Kind of erase that picture from your brain. And this time I want you to see someone, a pet or a higher power, anything or anyone that you find to be offering you unconditional love, or as close as you can get to that. Now, this could be somebody who is no longer on the planet. Could be somebody who is somebody who goes out of their way, and you can see it in their eyes. You can see how much they genuinely want to connect with you. And chances are your experience with this person, again, it could be a pet, could be a higher power. But this individual or entity has given you something that is, I think, one of the most precious things that we can ever experience. Again, I'm suggesting it falls in the category of unconditional love, or as close as we can get to that. Look into the eyes of that individual. Notice what happens to your body as you're looking at that person, that pet, that entity. Imagine what they're thinking as they look at you. And notice what happens in your body. And now I want you to literally reach your arms toward that person, that pet, or that entity. And be aware and notice what happens in your body as you do the reaching. Can you feel your body leaning into that energy? Are you able to breathe more fully? Do you feel more relaxed and open-hearted? Well, there's a hunger inside of all of us for the kind of connecting that we get from those people, entities, pets that give us unconditional love. It's a common theme in popular songs. I swim in the ocean, I climb any mountain, etc. In poetry and plays and movies, it's all around us. So it's such a common experience that people have that hunger for connecting. Maybe you could feel some of that hunger in the last exercise. But the key is the ability to melt into that contact, to melt into it. It's not just to feel it and experience it, but to melt into it. Many years ago, I couldn't melt into it. But I wanted connection, and I had relationships with a lot of women. but there wasn't any way that I could just melt and open my heart in a full way. I didn't even know there was a deeper level. I mean, it's one of those things, you only know what you know. Well, at that time, I obviously didn't know very much about heart connection. Later in therapy, I found out that my heart was quite guarded. And I had a song, this was back in the late 60s. Some of you are old enough to remember this song. Simon and Garfunkel had a song out, I am a rock, I am an island. And for whatever reason, that song just resonated with me. And that was one of my favorite songs. And part of the lyrics are, a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries. Boy, that smacks of something that I'm glad I've gotten past. At the same time, at that same period of time, Barbra Streisand had a song out, people who need people are the luckiest people in the world. I hated that song. I hated that song. But that was also the time period where I started into therapy. After about 3 years of therapy, I'm driving down the road, listening to the radio, and on comes the song, people who need people are the luckiest people in the world. I started bawling like a little baby. Almost hit the car in front of me. It really struck me, and it really got me to a point of saying, oh my God, now I have a greater sense. And since then, I've gotten a much greater sense about what it's like to really need another person. Sometimes I'm working with couples, and maybe we've had a few sessions together, and I can see that there's some block. And so when it's appropriate, I'll say to the husband, I'll say, I want you to look at your wife, and I want you to say these words to her. I need you. Well, guys can get pretty squirrely when you ask them to say that to their wife. But it's one of those things that, in my experience, helps get down to the foundational level of where some of the resistance and holding back feelings is all about. It's something about, I need you. So what does it mean to say, I need you? I'd like you to ponder this for a moment. What does it mean to say, I need you? For me, I need you means I need a place to direct my heart energy so that I can feel the love inside of me. It's like if I just broadcast out to the world in general, I love you, it's a different energy than having a target and having a place where I want to direct that heart energy. And if I can direct that heart energy toward another person, then ideally I get some of that reflected back. But even if I don't get it reflected back, there's a way that there's a target for that energy, and it helps me feel more of the love inside of me. So when I say I need you, I'm talking about I'm going to send energy to a specific place, to a specific person. And when I do that, I'm going to be able to feel more of the love that I have inside of my heart and feel that expression and be able to feel more of a love throughout my whole body. Makes me feel richly alive. I'm pretty convinced that we're talking about one of the greatest fears that we all have, surrendering to deep intimacy. Well, maybe being tortured to death. All right, so we can argue that one. But I would suspect that surrendering and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable to another person is one of the most frightening things that we do in life. So let's do another quick experiential process. And I'm going to invite you to stand for this one because you're not going to get any benefit out of it if you're sitting down. So I'm going to suggest that you stand, and I'm going to guide you through a brief little process. And this speaks to the grounding that I was talking about earlier, to be able to release some of the excess energy in our body and be able to feel much more centered within ourselves. And again, the idea being, if I'm centered within myself and I'm able to allow more of that energy to flow through my pelvis, I'm much more solidly connected to me. And when I'm connected to me, I have the ability then to withstand difficult circumstances, like rejection, like abandonment, like things that are painful in relationships. Okay, so to begin, what I'd like you to do is, again, to see a difficult person in your mind's eye. Could be the same person that you were looking at, seeing in your mind's eye before, could be a different one. But I'd like you to imagine a person who you have a very difficult relationship with, or had a very difficult relationship with. See that person in your mind's eye and imagine they're standing right in front of you. When you see that person, notice what happens in your body. And if you would just share a little bit about what your experience is, let me know what's happening. What do you notice in your body? Well, okay, we'll just keep moving on, but just be aware of what's happening in your body. And I'd like you to particularly put emphasis on what you feel in your heart area. What is it like in your heart area as you're standing across from this person that you're having a difficult relationship with? Notice your breathing, notice your jaw, notice your neck, your lower back. Several areas where there's a tendency to just tighten and pull back a little. Okay, so let's erase that picture. Now what I'm going to do is offer a brief little exercise. And if you have knee or ankle issues, be careful with this. We're not going to overdo this. But if you do have knee or ankle issues, be careful. Just listen to your body, make sure you're not overdoing it. So what I'd like you to do is stand with just whatever way you're standing right now, and just look down at your feet. Take a look at what that looks like. Be aware if your knees are locked or if they're soft. You don't need to change anything at this point. Just notice. Take a full breath and see how deep you can get that breath to go. All right. Now, I'm going to back up maybe enough that you can see. I'd like you to stand now in a way that your feet are parallel and they're about 6 or 8 inches apart, but they're parallel. Sometimes we stand in a way where our feet are splayed out, but see if you can bring them in more parallel. For some of you, that may be quite a difficult situation, but try it. And then soften your knees so that your knees are not locked, and allow your body to stand a little bit, your knees over your toes a little bit. So you're standing in a way where there's about 60% of your body weight in the front of your feet and about 40% in your heels. And now again, take a full breath in this new stance. Just a couple of deep breaths and see if you notice any difference. You may notice a difference, you may not, but just give it a try and see. All right, make a note of that. We'll talk about that later. Now what I'd like you to do is to put weight into one leg. Let's start with the left leg. Bring your body weight down into your left leg. Let your knee go straight forward. So the weight is coming down. Your right foot is there just for balance. You should be carrying almost the entire body weight in your left leg. And allow yourself to go down. Your heel stays on the floor and allow your weight to come down. Fortunately, the thighs of our body are the strongest muscles we have. So the thigh is taking the hit, but that's the design. Stay with it and stay with that weight in your left leg. In fact, even go a little bit deeper into that bend if you can. Again, listen to your body, don't overdo it. Come down as far as you can and let the breath out and cough at the end of each exhale. Just, ah. Ah. Now push the floor away from you and come back up to that balanced position where the weight is evenly distributed between right and left. And just get a brief comparison between your left leg and your right leg. And now do the same thing with the right leg. The weight comes down into your right leg. As deeply as you can, leave the heel on the floor. Make sure your pelvis is not getting locked. Breathe out and cough at the end of the breath. Couple more exhales. Now push the floor away from you. Come back up to a balanced position. Knees are soft. Most of the weight is in the front of your feet. And just take another full breath and see what it's like to take a deep breath now. All right, now I'd like you to spread your feet out a little bit wider. Take about 2 footprints to your left. And we're going to do the same thing with the left leg now. Well, wait a minute, before we do that, let's stand in that aligned stance. Feet are now 6 or 8 inches apart. Knees are soft. What I'd like you to imagine is that your whole body energy is a stream right now. Try to get a picture in your mind as to what a stream would look like based on the way you feel in your body. Would the stream be a rush of energy? Would it be a slow trickle of energy? Would it be a stream that's very deep or shallow? Would it be filled with a lot of debris? Maybe it has a lot of rocks in it. Or maybe it's very clear, it's flowing very smoothly. Use your imagination to decide what your stream looks like right now. Okay, so let's move now. About 2 footprints to the left. We're going to do the same thing. Bend the left knee straight out in front of you. Allow the weight of your body to be in that leg. Leave the heel on the floor. The right foot is there just for balance. Cough at the end of the exhale. The coughing is to help loosen the diaphragm. Now push the floor away from you. Keep the feet spread apart as wide as they were when you started this part. Again, notice any difference between right and left. And then go for your right leg. The right knee goes straight out. The weight comes down into your leg as deeply as you can go. Heel stays on the floor. When you breathe out, get to the end of your exhale and cough. One more full exhale with a cough. Now push the floor away from you. Come back to that space where your feet are about 6 or 8 inches apart. Knees are soft. About 60% of your body weight is in the front of your foot. Take a deep breath. See if there's a difference in the way that your breathing is now. And then go back to your imagination. What does your stream look like now? How does your stream look now? Screen. If you're getting some subtle vibrations in your legs, that's a good sign. We can talk about more of that later if you'd like, but now the last part of this is taking your footprint about 4 footprints to the left. And same thing, we're going to do this just briefly. Bend your left leg, bend knee. That left knee goes straight out in front of you, just like before. Heel stays on the floor. Cough at the end of the exhale. One more full exhale and cough. Push the floor away from you. Keep your legs way apart. Get a sense as to what it feels like between right and left side. And now go to the right leg. Right knee goes straight out in front of you. Heel stays on the floor. Come down as deeply as you can into that leg. Exhale, cough at the end of the breath. One more full exhale. Push the floor away from you. Bring your feet back to what we call the aligned stance, 6 or 8 inches apart between your feet. About 60% of your body weight is in the front of the foot, about 40% in your heels. Knees are soft. And pelvis is relaxed. And then go back to your imagination. What does your stream look like now? That flow of energy in your body. What does that look like now? And the last part of this is to bring back in your mind's eye that person who you have a very difficult relationship with. Your body is a little bit different now. What is it like as you bring back that person standing in front of you, the person that you have a very difficult relationship with? And see what happens to your body now. And if you'd like to share, please let us know either what your stream has been like through this process, how it began and where it is now, and what it was like, particularly between the before of that difficult relationship person and the way you feel about it now. Maybe there's a difference that you can share with us. What would you say? All right, well, I'll just share with you a few responses that I've gotten from people over the years as I've done this experience before. One of the main concepts about working the thighs is that excess energy in our body. Like I mentioned earlier, the theory is we always have excess energy in our body, and it looks for something to grab a hold of. Oftentimes it grabs a hold of more chatter in our head, grabs a hold of fears of various kinds. Anything we can do to bleed off some of that excess energy is going to save us from all of that energy going toward things that oftentimes fall in the negative realm of things. So as the thighs are working so hard, the little cartoon in my head is the thighs are saying, you want us to keep doing this? You want us to keep doing this? Where are we going to get the energy for it? Oh, there's some in the jaw. There's some in the chatter in the head. There's some in my shoulder. There's some in my neck. And literally, as I work with people over many years, it's consistent. Maybe people say before we begin the experience that they have a bit of a headache, or they have a tight jaw, or they have tightness and tension somewhere in their upper body. And when we get done with the experience, they'll say things like, wow, my headache's gone. They'll say the tension in my jaw is about 75% better. And I say, well, did we do anything with your upper body? No. All we did was work the thought. So the theory, in my experience, holds up very well. We can get out of some of our fear, out of some of our anxiety, if we work our lower body. And then the other piece that we'll get into in just a few minutes has to do with opening up the flow of energy in the pelvis. The other part of this has to do with the person who's standing in front of us that we have a difficult relationship with. I've heard it said many times before. When I first saw this person, I could feel myself tighten. I could feel my anger, I could feel my resentment, my jaw got tight, and my whole body got tense. At the end of the experience, I looked at that person and I thought, wow, I really feel sorry for them. I feel sad for them. That's a huge contrast, of course. Maybe some of you had a similar experience tonight. But the idea, again, being if I can be more solid within myself, I don't have to be in a protective mode. I don't have to be in a reactive mode. I can be much more centered within myself. And then I can approach difficult situations in ways that I feel strong and I feel in charge. So those are the main concepts. Any thoughts, comments, or questions about that? Okay, let's keep moving on. So there's a question in my mind is where in life do we see deep intimacy fully expressed? Where is it expressed the most? Unguarded, deep intimacy. I immediately think of babies. Just how hungry they are for contact and connection. So I have a little video, it's just a 3-minute video I want to share with you that to me illustrates this extremely well. Now I've got to have to get back to find out how to, I'll stop that share. And then I'll share the screen again. Hey, I'm getting this down. There it is. Okay, this is one that's titled The Still Face Mother. Some of you may have seen this before, but to me, it's such a great illustration of how hungry we are for contact. And my suggestion is that all of us are little kids in big bodies. We all have similar kinds of feelings, needs, emotions that babies have. So here's an illustration that's an experiment that can feel a little bit disturbing to watch, but I think it's a very important statement about attachment. Here we go. Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. And the still face experiment that the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with the baby who's about a year of age. And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at, oh, sorry, here we go. Different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions
and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on it. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes when they don't get at the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing. It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly. So I've seen that video maybe a dozen times, and every time I watch it, it's difficult. But at least for me, it's one of those things that I think is so important for us to recognize the hunger that we all have, the longing that we have, and how we really need to recognize that that's true for little babies, it's true for adults. And unless we do the repair, and there are very simple ways to do repair, we're stuck. Just like Dr. Tronick says, we're stuck. So it's a tall order, but it's something that I think is something so important for us to recognize. All right. So at this point, Jack Daniels for anybody? No, we don't need that. We can face this stuff, right? So we can turn to addictions of various kinds. Some of them are negative, some of them are positive, like alcohol, like drugs, to avoid this kind of hunger and this longing that we have inside. We can turn to positive ones like exercise, but maybe being constantly busy, like has been true for me in a lot of my life. There are a lot of ways to run away from ourselves. But to me, we're oftentimes running away from how much we need a connection with self and with others. So I have a brief story to tell you about a client, a couple that I worked with years ago. We'll just call them Mike and Jane. They were really in love with each other. They'd been married a couple of years, and they came in because she said that Mike will, with some frequency, just really blow up at her, really get very angry with her for what appeared to be very little reason. So what I did was, and Mike was clear, he was very much in love with his wife, and he did not want to keep blowing up. He knew that he was doing it. He'd always regretted afterwards, but he kept doing it. So I said, okay, Mike, let's do something. Let me ask you to just check in and see what you're aware of in your body as you think back to one of those times that you blew up in front of your wife. And just recall as best you can the way it felt in your body. And after maybe 30 seconds or a minute, after guiding him, he described the way that it felt in his body whenever he was beginning to get angry and finally blew up. He would feel the energy of his body move from his fingertips up his arms, from his toes up his legs, and all of this energy would converge right at his heart. And I said, it's not pleasant, but I want you to stay with that feeling just for maybe 15, 20 seconds, something like that. But I'd like you to recall back in your mind's eye a time when you've had the same body experience. You don't have to try to search for it. Just be with the feeling, and if memories are ready to come, they'll come. So he stayed with the feeling, and then I said, okay, so what's the earliest memory? I was 5 years old, lying on my back with my drunk father standing over me with a belt. And he said, if you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. Mike said at that moment, he really thought his dad was going to kill him. He thought he was going to die in that moment. So there was no repair of any of that. But he and his wife recognized that whenever he began to have that reaction and blew up at her, it was a PTSD situation, post-traumatic stress disorder, such that every time he got angry, he really felt like he was going to be killed. Now, not consciously, but at an unconscious level. So fortunate for them, they were able to use that. And every time he started to get that feeling, both of them would be able to say, okay, I know you're not going to be killed here. And you know you're not going to be killed here. Let's just take a few breaths. Anyway, they were able to work through it. But thank goodness he was able to get connected to an awareness that was trapped in his body. So there are other PTSD story types of situations we've all heard about. People who've been involved in war, car backfires, and they dive for the curb and they just huddle up on the curb on the street. You meet a nice person, very nice person, but he happens to look a lot like the uncle who sexually abused you. You can't stand being around this person. You're driving through an intersection where you'd had a terrible car accident just a year prior. And when you're approaching that intersection, your palms start sweating, you start breathing very shallow, and you start to hyperventilate. We all have things that are locked into our bodies in ways that, unless we move them through our system somehow, we're going to continue to be haunted by that kind of stuff. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a concept that I think is very profound. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, Bessel-van-der-Kolk. Bessel van der Kolk. Anyway, it's a great book. Some of you have probably read it, but to me, it's a great work on trauma and dealing with how to deal with trauma. So going back to the I need you part, I need you. I need a place to direct my heart energy so that I can feel the love inside of me. When I have a place that I can direct that energy, I am able to experience more of that inside of me. But we all have tension in our body. Why is that? Because we're afraid. Muscle tension doesn't just automatically happen. There's a psychological, emotional piece to that. There's chronic tension in our bodies. I'll tell you a little story about myself. So you can see the way I'm standing now, and just get a sense as to what that's like as you see the way I'm standing now. Just any reaction. Doesn't have to be any reaction at all, but just your own sense of this, and then I'll show you the way I used to stand. This is the way I used to stand. So my therapist would say, relax your shoulders. Okay, they're relaxed. You only know what you know. I couldn't relax my shoulders. My therapist called this my Wyatt Earp stance. Right? Stiff back, pelvis cocked back. I could tell you on and on about the way that affected my day-to-day life, my sexuality, etc., but I won't bore you with that. So
as I stand that way now, it's so difficult for me because the breathing is more difficult, et cetera. It's just very uncomfortable. But we can work to release the muscle tension in various places in our body. But unless we're releasing the tension in our diaphragm, we're kind of swimming upstream. So as I work with clients, one of the first things I do is have them do some deep breathing, and if necessary, guide them through some exercises to be able to relax and open up their diaphragm. I wasn't able to do that until I was in my early 30s. And my God, when I first took a full breath, I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. So full belly breath, opening the diaphragm, a critically important part of being able to relax our body enough. Because if I've got tension in my neck or my shoulders or whatever, and I'm starting to work there, but my diaphragm is still tight, I'm not going to make much headway on any of those areas of tension. Okay, so I'm going to check on the time because I think we have, what, an hour and a half, but we wanted to allow some time for Q&A.
Yeah, we've got about 15 minutes left.
15 minutes, okay. All right, so I'll just offer a few more concepts, and then I'm going to offer you a few more techniques, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Okay. So my suggestion and the way that I think about this, if we're not connected at our heart, the default position is power and control. So to some extent, we're going to be in a power and control situation. Consider this scene. I'm so upset that you promised to be home on time to take us to the soccer game. After all, it was the championship game of our 10-year-old daughter. You said you'd be on time. I ended up having to cram everybody into the small little Volkswagen. Johnny's too big for that car seat, but I had to cram him into that. And we got to the game, and then you show up. I am so upset with you. So, guy thinking, well, all right, this is difficult. I've been late before, and yeah, I feel really embarrassed about the whole thing, but what does he say? Does he say, oh, I am so sorry? No, he says, late? What about you? What about 3 years ago? You did not even show up for my brother's wedding. I was so embarrassed. The whole family was wondering, where the heck is... I was so embarrassed, all right? So the best defense is a good offense, right? Power and control. Trying to stay in power, trying to stay in control versus allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. All right. So let's talk just about a few additional kinds of techniques. We've already gone through doing some grounding, putting weight into each leg, and hopefully you felt some shift or experience with that. Coughing to open up the diaphragm is another way to help get more centered and more connected. Let's again go into your imagination. I'd like you to think back to a moment that you were in bliss, a very blissful situation. Maybe you were in love and you're walking on cloud 9. Maybe you were holding your child in the delivery room, or your first grandbaby, you were holding your grandbaby. Just remember that moment, whatever it was, a special moment, a moment that just, you felt just very overwhelmed with a sense of peace, joy, happiness. And as you think about that moment, I'd like you to allow a smile to come over your face. Don't force it, just allow it. Be in that moment and just allow a smile to come over your face. There's something profound about all the muscles of the face, and there's something profound about smiles. We won't get into the science of all that, but that's another way that you can kind of nudge your heart into a more open position. Another process that you might want to try is telling your partner, if you're in a relationship, I am afraid of how much I need you. It's kind of a risky thing to do if you don't have a real deep connecting or trusting relationship with a partner. But if you're wanting to bring your relationship to a deeper layer, I'd encourage you to do this with some frequency. And if you haven't done it at all, I encourage you to take a risk and give it a try. You may even want to mention to your partner ahead of time, say, I'm going to do something this Rick guy suggested I do. And I'm not sure where it's going to go, but it really frightens me. And my hope is that you'll give me a lot of TLC and we can just dialogue about this, because it's kind of scary to me. Anyway, I'm afraid of how much I need you. Another idea, and I'm not going to go into all the science behind it, but is to go to your partner and say, will you just hold me and I'm going to cry? And maybe you don't feel the tears, but it's not that difficult to generate tears unless your heart is really blocked. Ask your partner to hold you and just create a cry. And allow your partner to comfort you. I talked about the diaphragm earlier. There are wonderful ways to open the diaphragm. One is just a good belly laugh. And you can do that on your own at any time too, just like crying. You can create that. We can do it together. It can be rather infectious, but it's a great way to loosen the diaphragm. Crying can open the diaphragm, so can throwing up. I don't necessarily recommend that, but we've all had the flu before, and oof, all of a sudden we feel a lot better after we release that stuff. So there are other techniques, and I'm not going to get into those because they might take a little bit of a demonstration. But opening the diaphragm, big part of this whole thing. Grounding is a big part of this whole thing. Allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, and it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. But opening up the flow of energy in the pelvis, we didn't get into too many specifics there, but there are some wonderful tools and techniques to allow that to happen. So my closing comment, and then I'll field any questions that you have, is that the best way to open the heart is to allow the energy to flow through our pelvis and to ground our energy. All right, so I'm ready to field any questions or comments that you have.
Rick, do you have any resources that you can suggest if people want to examine some of these experiential experiences or look into some other ones?
I do. What I can do is, I guess, email them to you, and I'm assuming that you can then email those out. Would that work?
Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody that would like information that Rick's talking about, or if you want CEUs for tonight's presentation, just reach out to us at info@D2Counseling. I put that in the chat, info@D2Counseling, and just let us know if you want CEUs or resources from Rick's presentation or both, and we'll get that to you.
We've got a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Rick, can you hear me?
I can.
I just want to say, don't feel bad. I just did a 2-hour presentation a week ago for Dallas Metro Counseling Association on a topic that I just thought it would create the most intense discussion and questions no one said a thing for 2 hours. And so don't feel bad. But I'll try to think of a question.
Well, thank you for that comment, and I'm fine with however it goes. It's such a different experience not having that face-to-face live
Yeah.
experience, because I do lots of those workshops and the energy is really palpable. So I see a question on the screen from Lori to everyone. Is this medical Qigong? I've not heard it described that way before, but it's bioenergetics is the paradigm that I come from.
I just have a comment, Rick. I think of how many therapists there are on this Zoom call tonight and how we spend hour after hour, year after year, sitting on our pelvic area and not moving and not creating the flow that you talk about.
Yeah.
And how important some of these exercises are to just do in between session, to just stand up and get that flow moving again.
Well, that makes total sense to me after all these years of using this modality. And some of the ways that I was introduced to it, it just blew me out of the water when I first began to experience some energy coming up through my body. And it's a pretty amazing process.
Well, Rick, we want to thank you for being here tonight. I forgot to mention when we opened that this is co-hosted by Unity Church of Dallas. And it's easy for that to slip my mind since we've gone completely to Zoom, but we continue in partnership with them. And when we get back to in-person presentations, hopefully sometime in the upcoming year, we will be doing those in person, and I suspect we'll continue to do hybrid for a period of time. But they host it at the Unity Church there on Forest Lane, and we appreciate their support. And they've been very good to work with, and we continue to work with them even though we are limited to Zoom at this time. This will be posted on our website. We make these available afterwards. And if anybody wants to come back and check out Rick's laughter.
Or his cough, his COVID cough. He said it was an exercise, but we're not so sure.
Or the jokes at the beginning. So any of those we can come back and check on. But listen, we want to thank you very much for the presentation, and thank all of you for attending.
Thank you all.
Thanks for being here. Have a good holiday. See you in the new year.
Hey, thanks, you too.